To a full IGA.
Subliminal messages.
Yeah, really.
We have
Block, Tom Murphy.
Yeah, it's
Good evening, gentlemen. The fourth
If we
estate
had
is
proper
going.
controls, this wouldn't be happening.
Yeah.
Go there.
Yeah, we should have a better control
Include
supply
that in
there.
your pitch.
Yeah,
We can take care of that for you.
really. Councilman,
yes, sir.
how are you, sir?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good, thank you. Good to see you, Councilman Bernardo. I don't want you to feel ignored over
The IT lady.
there. Yeah,
Monica, she just walked in that way.
Oh, wow.
I thought.
That light will give me a memory.
Hasn't even been a week since I've been here.
It's just doing a LG.
Doing the warm up thing.
This is not bad, that.
Yeah, that one is.
Don't look at it.
Something not working?
She put the bullet up on the wall.
So guess what I found out Saturday?
Yeah.
Mrs.
It would be
Sanders.
worth it.
Did you see that game?
The Bubs one? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Just unplug the heat.
That was pretty sweet.
Greg, when
I
you
watched the
know
last
what
couple.
I can do that.
You know what the N on the Nebraska helmet stands for?
Knowledge.
Knowledge.
Knowledge, yeah. That's funny.
I used
That's
to
a
hear that in
compliment.
North Dakota too. Do you know what the N and UND means?
Can you say? Oh, there you go.
Same exact joke.
Wait till they go and see the Gators next week.
I think, Elizabeth just finds out.
So now just one monitor.
Fix the contrary. Has to have some sort of competition.
Yeah, they're all
Bob
on.
Boulder's wife went to teacher school.
Yeah, it's just supposed to be a culture.
Go Bears.
The TV.
No signal.
Did you go to UNC?
We're sorry.
Boulder tells you, no listening, no credit.
I remember that. Or no choice.
Oh, yeah.
If you were.
Oh, she's driving home.
That's where you went.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Is that Durango?
Well, I know.
Where'd you go to school, Durango or Red Deer?
Durango.
They want to do it under USBC. Yeah, Fort Lewis are going to be more like
Yeah.
a PPA.
Our motto was ski Fort Lewis, earn a degree in your
So
spare
we're going to
time.
stop by.
Yeah,
Land of Durango.
That's right.
So I'm going to stop by and just talk to them tomorrow and see how.
I went to Pueblo, Southern Colorado State College, sucks on
I all three won better.
Harvard on the Hill.
That's right.
Government get together.
What's that?
I went
I
there
went
too.
to TSJC.
I did too.
Talking about.
I went there my freshman year.
Good.
I got kicked out of their basketball tournament one night.
Way to
By
go.
the kid cops.
Oh,
Of which
you-
Eddie, I think, was one.
Yeah.
Man, you must have been
Judy
on the
beat
basketball.
Where are you?
I'm surprised she's going
back.
to jail.
She left.
Oh, that's right. That
Wow.
was so
I
mad.
just beat him up.
You've been like,
Are we ready to
you're
go?
like-
There's our friend Cheryl knocking around in the house. Whoop, whoop,
Like I
whoop,
said,
whoop.
trying to make
Somebody's
sure
showing up on one of them,
We'll just
and
stop.
it's flashing.
And the one you can't see, but I guess I could if I. Paint a very graphic picture in your presentation.
Yeah, that's right. Don't rely. Good idea. Do the reset.
I saw.
Yeah, but still, why are the other ones not working?
Right. Nothing.
Says no signal.
Yeah, every time I go through there in the last few months, I walk around. Jeez. Yeah. There's a ton of work. I don't know.
Apologize.
It's okay, it happens.
So we'll just have to move the meeting to another night?
Yeah. This is, I'm sorry, I'm not one of you guys. I'm not one of the seven. I didn't mean to agree right away.
Or later tonight.
No.
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 You just don't want to watch that football game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think so.
It's gonna go on way past my
It's not working on that monitor.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
flashing on that monitor.
I mean, I'll,
You have it on the flash?
I know they will. They will.
I can put it on a
I
flash.
know, I wish I could say otherwise. I wish we could have banter and say, no, the Raiders are gonna win. No chance.
No chance, no choice.
What's the other game tonight?
Yeah.
Lions and Jets.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Who are the Jets Lions tonight? Is the,
I think so.
Are we expecting those here?
Bet you can, Clark.
Okay.
Okay, I'm on the Lions.
the next way back to the Jets?
I like moving away.
Yeah.
We need a quorum.
That's Just curious.
So has anybody else bought a pizza at this club thing?
Yes.
So did I.
Did you
Good
good?
pizza?
Yeah, very good pizza. I was selling counts and on Friday, bought a pizza, it was very good.
Yeah.
It really inexpensive. Steve, have you bought a pizza for you? Okay,
I'm not even allowed to
buy
have a
pizza and
like
talk about how wonderful it is. Okay.
Yeah.
So everything's
So I
It's
have
good pizza.
December, February, March, and April. This is that back to me.
I know this. Kimberly, where have you been? We could have started.
We started working either, we got our IT job.
I should have known better.
Introduce
My mom would have said, put a nickel in here.
Because a nickel is all it takes. It's Monday Night Football, not Monday. Here's your
I
brain.
can shoot those back.
If everybody has their, PDF, like, just
I
like
think
PDF instead of project, I think.
I've got mine.
Okay.
You got yours in a printed format, right?
Yeah, because I don't like that.
They're all, it's like, it's up there, correct?
So this one's not.
It doesn't matter, they're both doing the same thing.
That one isn't flashing.
We're selling a few other things, otherwise.
I apologize.
I know. Mike, you're very nice.
Well, it might be right here.
The best light is
Something just came up.
go awry.
That's because Rowena's.
It's relevant. That's all we have.
Oh, yeah, I see, okay.
It's underneath.
I came up.
Okay.
Carlos went
Yes.
to it.
Was Cardangle?
Oh, really? You're gonna put on the video?
Attended? Yeah, it was a pretty decent crowd.
If you want to do
Well, no, I don't care.
Go ahead, it's hard to solve.
Well, you guys have to dig up.
Yeah, I'd be part of the group.
Come and sit at the big boy table.
Yeah, there's.
You're like at the kids' table on Thanksgiving.
I'll sit one right there.
No, they said it's 6:30. There were people there, but. But granted, it was 21.
This one finally stopped flashing, all three of the other ones. Those back there are working.
I just shut these off and turn them back on and like this.
I tried.
Oh, really?
These two off, I turn them on and just.
I've never heard of
This was one of my dads. Yeah. You're gonna pump hard there.
Oh, this is too.
He did. He had some neat ones too, like elf antlers that were carved into like a thing, like an elf or whatever. And then my grandfather made some too.
Got one working. I'm gonna call that good.
These ones aren't flashing. I don't have anything else. Now
There's no
it's
signal.
no signal.
It's doing the same as that.
Right.
No idea.
Monica should be here. If you want to kick it off, we'll do introductions and everything.
Okay. Counselor,
Yes, sir.
are you ready?
Yes.
Here comes Monica.
Here she is.
Hi, Monica, thank you. Hi, you're welcome.
All eyes are upon you, Monica.
The council have been on and moved over.
Did? Oh, I thought like a little pup was.
Kid table with them.
That's
I
right.
like the kid table.
Yeah, I hear it.
I used to volunteer.
Much better
Yes.
conversation.
I used to volunteer to sit there.
Yeah.
And everybody agreed it was wise.
That's right. That's right.
Ms. Good? May we come to order? It's September the 10th, and it's past the appointed hour. Mayor Rico is not here, and neither is the Mayor Pro Tem. So the rule of succession, you get Speaker of the House. The meeting is now in order. Can we welcome you? The folks making the presentation?
Council, thank you. Apologize for the technical delays. If you recall, a few months back, April or so, we came to you regarding a meter replacement program utilizing the Colorado Energy Office and an energy service company. JCI was selected, and they've got this wonderful presentation for you.
Thank you, Monica.
You're welcome. Thanks, Monica.
I'll turn it over to you for your introductions. Thanks.
Mike, thank you. Councilman, Councilwoman, thank you for your time this evening. My name is Rowena Adams. I'm with Johnson Controls. I sat in front of you, or stood before you, 6 months ago to talk about an energy performance contract that involved utility metering, a utility metering project for the city of Trinidad. With me today, I'd like to introduce some other individuals for this work session, but for the first 30 minutes, I'll be presenting on behalf of my company. Today with me, I have Josh Wilkins with Johnson Controls.
Welcome.
I have Craig Mays, also with Johnson Controls. And I also like to introduce Taylor Lewis with the Colorado Energy Office. As he'll have a couple of slides here that he'll be presenting. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and run through some of these slides with all of you. All of you should have received a packet that had a PDF of the slides that we're presenting today, with the exception of 2 slides inserted by the Colorado Energy Office, and that'll come here in about 3 or 4 slides. So, let's see if I can advance PDF. There we go. Excuse me, since I'll be advancing slides on a PDF versus a PowerPoint. So this utility metering project, I've also titled a revenue reconciliation project, because when we're talking about meters across the city organization, we're talking about essentially revenue that's being measured by these meters for your utility department, water, gas, and electric. So what we know today in terms of that infrastructure is that it's an existing infrastructure that's about, quite 50 years old or so, even 60 years old. It's infrastructure that's been in place for a long time that needs some reinvestment. We also recognize that there's a utility budget that's been strapped in order to put some reinvestment into that existing infrastructure. What we strongly believe is that the city is losing some revenue based on that infrastructure. These meters are responsible for a lot of revenue, and that revenue has been decreasing over time because those meters are losing accuracy over time and they are being read manually. So that introduces a lot of different things in terms of error. Advancing to the next slide. Slowly. The solution into reinvesting into that infrastructure and recovering some of that revenue would be to do a turnkey design build solution with a guaranteed performance contractor that can own that infrastructure and guarantee that performance for that infrastructure that can collect that reconciliation of the revenue. So how do we go about doing that? The 3 main data points that I want to point your attention to is that we're going to be recovering revenue through unbilled water, gas, and electric. And we're going to be increasing the efficiency by collecting that information through an automated advanced metering system that's going to enhance city operations and the efficiency in collecting that information. A component of that is really revamping the billing system in terms of reconciling what's out in the field that has been changing over time. So that's changing time over 60 years, and that happens in any city organization. And truing up what's out in the field and bringing all that information back into a data system that can reconcile a lot of the errors that have been occurring over time. So with that program, we're also going to be working with Colorado Energy Office hand in hand. And the next couple slides really talk about that Colorado Energy Office oversight.
I have a quick question for you. You said that the devices would be owned by who?
This would be owned by the city.
Okay.
Yep. So
I
these
didn't
are,
think you'd want to go back into homes later and collect them.
Right, right, no,
Okay, just
no,
making sure I understood that correctly. Thank you.
sure,
You're more talking about owning the process, not the actual meters, right?
right.
Now, what about the software and any type of IP addresses that need to go along with it? Because I'm sure you're going to be collecting through an internet portal and such like that. I'm sure not IP address, but whatever tech savvy things that I'm not aware of. Who owns that intellectual property? Is it still owned by Johnson Controls that we pay a service fee to you all for?
No, so where we are a part of that process is a design build contractor. So we bring the pieces and the parts and help fund it through a performance contract. So we help leverage that solution into a finance mechanism.
Okay.
So that ownership is yours. So these meters the city owns essentially, right? And so that AMI infrastructure, that software, that hardware that's in place to collect all that information will be owned by the city. And there'll be a vendor that is hosting that information that will also be providing that information to the city.
And my last question, the implementation of these meters, would that be performed by Johnson Controls staff or by City of Trinidad's Water Department staff?
Well, a portion of that scope will be installed by Johnson Controls, and the other portion would be installed by the city's choosing. So for the natural gas scope, that will be for the city's choosing, and for the water and electric, that will be under Johnson Controls scope.
Okay.
Oh, I don't think we have that in here. Yeah, maybe. Oh, no, here we go.
All right, thank you, counselors. As Rowena said, my name is David Lewis. I'm a program engineer with the Colorado Energy Office, particularly for the Energy Performance Contracting program that operates out of the Colorado Energy Office. That program is in place to help entities such as yourselves, municipalities, special districts, state agencies, school districts, to implement the state's energy performance contracting statutes, execute projects which utilize those statutes to fund utility cost savings projects throughout the state. So I just want to give you a little bit of background on those statutes, kind of let you know how we got here, do the full, our program. Those statutes were first introduced in 1988, so 30 years old now. They've been in place and separated into both a state agency focused set of statutes and a local government piece of legislation that is what we're operating under here. In 2017, so last year, the legislature approved a bill that would enable entities such as yourselves to look at projects that would allow you to capture revenue benefits and operational savings associated with these meter projects under the Energy Performance Contracting Statute, and therefore through our program. So that's what has allowed us to take this 30-year-old program and adopt it for use in this particular scope of work that we're talking about here at the City of Trinidad. We don't need to read those, but I guess, so we have the statute, been in place for 30 years. To date, we've done 207 projects throughout the state, about $570 million. So this is a well-recognized program in the country. We have some very rigorous processes, protocols, documents that we have utilized here to date for this process with Mike and his team at Johnson Controls. And I've been involved throughout that process to help to ensure that the City of Trinidad gets the benefits that are being claimed here by Johnson Controls for the life of the project. So I just wanted to mention a few bullets here and what I've been involved with here. First and foremost, myself as a licensed engineer, I've been acting as a third-party engineering consultant to Mike and the utility department here, helping Mike to first, in the next bullet here, kind of go through the ESCO selection, put together an RFP, selecting from our office's pre-qualified energy services firms to select the firm that would best suit the city's needs. I've helped along the way to set up, once Johnson Controls was selected, the investment grade audit contract and work through that process. That is the document that outlines the scope of work that Johnson Controls would proceed with to identify the project which Rowena will present to you. Additionally, our office helps to maintain both financing and construction contract documentation. So I've been assisting along that process with template documents and leveraging knowledge from those past 200 and some projects to ensure that what the city is potentially embarking on here is in line with the program's history.
Can you tell me what those abbreviations stand for, the ESCO
Sure.
and IGA?
Sure. So IGA is investment grade audit, but because there is a large financing funding component of that, that's where the investment grade comes from. That's a large part of my role, is to make sure that this document that the ESCO's energy service companies, the energy service companies produce this audit, and part of my responsibility at the energy office is to ensure that this investment grade audit is just that, investment grade, and it will be a project that the city can rely on to repay that funding over time.
Thank you.
So with that, I guess there's a few things here, and Rowena's going to touch on this, but my role in this, like I said, is to help ensure that the city's embarking on a project that will fund itself over the term that is allowed under the statute. And through this process, I've worked with both Mike and his staff here at the city, and Rowena and the staff at JCI, to ensure that some of the information that Rowena is about to provide you is accurate relative to how the city's been operating, responsible in terms of some of Colorado's unique rules around these types of projects and how they're funded, and really working to make sure that you guys get what, when we set out in the beginning, the types of measures, the water, gas, and electric meters, and the AMI, working to make sure that from a technical engineering standpoint, you guys are getting what you need for the city to move forward into the future with your utility infrastructure. With that, if there's any questions, we'll give it back to Rowena.
I have one more. What is COAG?
Sure, sorry, the Colorado Attorney General. So all the documents that we have, they start out really as a state agency focused document, and our office works with the Attorney General's office. They have a legal consultant specializing in local government, and we take those state focused contracts and revise them to better suit the needs of Colorado's local jurisdictions.
And lastly, I'm guessing CEO is Colorado Energy Office?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, too many acronyms.
It's all right.
Lesson learned. Yep.
Well, it keeps it short, but I just wanted to know I was on the same page.
Yep.
I didn't think it was the Chief Executive Officer.
No, it's kind of, it looks bad, so it's the first thing that shows up on all of our emails from our office. It's very misleading, so get that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. So I wanted to go through this slide real quick because it's been several months since I've been up here to talk to you. And one of the things that Mayor Rico had requested of us was to come back and talk about the project benefits. And so I wanted to provide a timeline that essentially takes you to what we've been doing for the last several months. So in May, we were interviewing with the city, and the staff selected Johnson Controls as part of that interview process. In April, you move forward with investment grade audit. Mike Valentine presented that investment grade audit to the city. I presented and answered any questions that the council had. For 3 months after that, we embarked on what we call an investment grade audit process, which is essentially a deep dive into your utility infrastructure. We did some water meter testing. We looked at your natural gas testing and your meters out there in the infrastructure. And I think that's important to point out because City of Trinidad is very unique in a sense that it manages 3 utilities and manages it very well. We don't find many cities that do that. And when we do encounter cities that manage 3 utilities, natural gas is typically one of those utilities that hold their accuracy over time in terms of their meters. In this case, we have some older infrastructure in there that makes a lot of sense to replace, particularly because of the technology that we're putting on top of that meter that will more easily convey that information. We looked at some other things in terms of the billing system and the reconciliation of the amount of errors that might exist in that infrastructure that happens over time, right? Cities grow, services, customers change in terms of what their meters actually are sized to measure. So we went through that process to really understand what's out there in the field. Through that process, we uncovered a lot. In fact, it was startling for us and sometimes even startling for the city staff because there is a lot of things that can get trued up. And what we're responsible for at the end of the day is truing up to make sure that that information is correct. So you can bill each of your customers the appropriate amount of utility that they use. In August, we presented what those project costs look like and the various vendors that were considered to do that work and the technologies that exist. We went through a pre-qualification stage with the city staff to identify the vendors that we think is the most appropriate for the city. Johnson Controls holds a lot of experience in that landscape because we've done over 150 projects where we're looking at utility infrastructure, rehabilitation, and reinvestment. Before moving on, any questions on that timeline? Yes.
Question, when you did the meter testing on the existing meters, was there a specific process you went through, or was it just random? Did you pull commercial meters? Did you pull residential, or was there a specifics to the testing?
Yes, good question. So yes, over time, over our experience, Johnson Controls has a standardized method of how we go about testing. So for water meters, we want to make sure that we take a statistical random sample. So that means essentially we have to pull and replace. So we would have to identify a random sampling of water meters. So that's along certain sizes. So this would be the small meter population. We went in and tested all the large meters that could be tested. So large meters obviously bring in a lot of revenue into the city, so we want to test those in place, in situ. But over time, sometimes those large meters don't have the necessary ports and isolations in order for us to test it. So we were able to test the ones that we could. We've quantified some benefit for the ones that we think are outdated, so to speak, that you would be able to replace and garner some additional revenue. And for the intermediate test, so this is just for the water meters, we went and tested in the intermediate and logged some of the flows in order to right size and right size those meters. I think it's something else. Yeah. For the electric, we did test the polyphase meters to make sure that they were accurate. So we quantified some benefit over those as well. And through our experience, we also were able to quantify some single phase, so the residential electrical meters as well. We went out and we tested some natural gas meters, and we quantified some benefit there.
Now I understand that we have some electrical meters that are inside of buildings and set up on the outside. Is there going to be a remedy for those existing meters so that way they are now in a correct location for meter readers from our staff's perspective? And 2, will there be an additional charge in order to get that incurred for those property owners, or is that going to be part of the entire bill?
That's a great question. So yes, part of the nuance of each meter replacement will be, number one, to make sure that the reading of those meters are accessible, right? Because getting those meters, that meter data is going to be a core component of what we're going to do. Part of our scope, which I'll get to here in a few, will be to do a comprehensive survey of water, gas, and electric. over time, right, you want to try to make sure that all the data out in the field matches your billing system. What we've recognized through the testing is that sometimes that data isn't entirely accurate. So in order for us to do our due diligence to make sure that we are able to guarantee that performance would be to do a survey across the distribution. So we're going to be able to identify those locations where that exists and come up with a remedy for that as part of the project. So right now, the project is about ensuring that that data point is accessible, and to the extent that we need to configure something different, we're going to work with your staff, the city staff, to identify what would be the best scenario to look at in order to make those endpoints accessible. And the endpoint being the actual receiver or transmitter that's going to be received by your infrastructure.
Okay. I just want to make sure that, like, when our people that are living in town, like, hey, we're doing all these big changes, and granted, our community is paying through our refund or resources that we have.
Sure.
I just wanted to see a property owner saying, why am I all of a sudden getting charged an additional bill to move my meter when this is done by the city choice? So, is that a question, I guess, that you and Mike would have to get to us, we can get out to the community
That will,
for an answer?
that will be part of the promotion that we have as we're implementing the project.
Okay.
So that people know what's coming. That's one of the things we talked about today that may be a little bit of a challenge is when you change out gas meters, just like if someone were to lose their gas service for any other reason, sometimes the couplers don't work, and sometimes you can't relight pilot lights and things like that. So that's probably a whole different process to get past that. We're not going to be replacing furnaces and things
I understand that, but I just mean for the meter itself, where it is, if one has to be relocated. Exactly.
Right.
I mean, most of the gas meters are already outside,
Yeah,
but there are some electric
sounds
meters
like
that are
that's a
inside.
fairly small number, 20-ish.
Okay.
Yeah, that's surprising.
Councilman Lopez?
Yes, sir.
We'll do some checking. We'll have an answer for you next week, but I'm really confident that the cost associated with meters going from inside to outside is covered as part of this project.
Okay, that's all I make sure, because I don't want our citizens to incur another additional burden after, I mean, we are going to be paying with tax dollars that they're paying for. This is a community paid for service, which is for the betterment of, I think, moving us into the new millennium, but.
No, it's a good question. I'm confident we've got this covered, but we'll double check that.
Thank you.
And that's a good thing to point out, because over time there are people that have accurate meters that are subsidizing people that don't have accurate meters, right? So to your point, Councilman Lopez, the community is paying for this project, whether they know it or not, right?
Right.
And so those isolated incidences where we have to change some of the wiring, I think that's something that we can identify for the locations, and I think that comprehensive survey is going to help ferret those locations out. And to Josh's point, I mean, I think we have about 20 or so that we're looking at, maybe more, maybe less.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, is it fair to assume that the metering system as it now exists works to the detriment of the city and the benefit of the consumer, in that we're not really measuring that which they are receiving and consuming? And in my mind, as I'm sitting here listening to this, I'm thinking, when all of this is in place, if that assumption is correct, that most customers are going to realize a higher utility bill, because now they're going to be asked to pay for that which they are truly receiving and using. And it's something, to your point about the expense for the customer, that we're going to have to be responsible for answering. And is that accurate? Is that a fair understanding? Do I have that right?
Right, so to answer your first question about being a detriment to the city, so manual reading in itself, right, introduces some error in how that data gets put into the data system. When you look at certain losses across the system, you kind of go down the line and you identify, okay, well, at least you can cross this T, that's not the issue, right? You can cross this other T, that's not the issue. So one of the first things that we're going to be doing through this comprehensive audit is just making sure that the billing system is reflective of what's out in the field.
Okay.
The second thing that we're going to be doing, and this kind of talks to this slide in terms of a comprehensive water audit and the gas and the electric, is we're also going to make sure that the meters out in the field that are inaccurate and are older are now going to be accurate. Yep.
And a more logistical kind of question. We have an aging delivery system underground. We have in a lot of areas and a lot of the homes that you're going to be working with, older homes.
Sure.
So now we have two older components, and we're going to put a high-tech meter in the middle of that system. What problems are you anticipating there, and how's that going to fit? We're going to put a brand new electronic device in an old car.
Yeah, so the infrastructure, so my background is civil, environmental, and chemical engineering.
I got you.
So the infrastructure out there, right, is solid in terms of its life, its expected life, 50 to 60 years, right?
Okay.
But to your point, the meter that we're replacing is a device that will work based on that infrastructure. So we'll be configuring fittings and other components to that infrastructure.
Which would generate that question. Earlier there was some discussion about couplers and pilot lights and making all that work. And I'm just thinking, I always think, what can go wrong?
Yeah, right.
The issue with water meters more than anything is they become less and less accurate over time.
I get you.
And so by putting in new water meters, they're gonna be accurate.
But the new water meters that we're putting in that have greater accuracy, they're going to be compatible with the line that takes it to that point, and then from that point,
Yes.
we'll be able to make those connections and just put a brand new meter, and we're not going to have an unnecessarily large volume of pressure or anything like that that's going to cause pipes and residents to blow up.
No.
And none of
The
that,
meter
what
doesn't
can go
change the
wrong
pressure.
things that I think about at night.
We have to deliver water to people's houses that's within a residential pressure range.
Okay, well, the house that I live in, for example, built 15 years ago or thereabouts, and the meter's outside and everything's very accessible and open, and that's a good thing. You're going to be crawling in a lot of crawl spaces if that's not the case, I would think. And there's going to be creepy crawly things there in addition to fittings that don't line up.
That's right.
I'm glad I don't do this for a living.
That's kind of what plumbers do.
Okay, well, I'll shut up.
But I think I understand your point though about
Yeah.
the fees that are going to be accessed. Now
Yeah.
people may have a higher bill.
That's right.
But at the same token, that's been a detriment to the city where we've been picking up the slack for people who haven't been paying their fair
Well,
share.
it's like, agricultural land is taxed at a much lower rate, and recently, Joey, if it's not a true agricultural experience, people are charged with either vacant land or residential properties. So people who were paying like $10 and $15 a year are now paying $200. And they're screaming mad when they call up the treasurer's office, right?
So there's something wrong
This is
with that.
wrong, and you didn't think that was wrong for that to happen?
So Councilman Manning,
Can I answer that question? So most of the residential meters, we're talking about, I think, less than 10% accuracy.
Okay.
So if your water bill was $50 a month, you're talking about a $5 a month increase.
Yeah,
It just adds up.
Five-
I'm sorry.
10%, I got you.
Yeah, what we're really talking about for most of your, excuse me, residential water consumers is around 10% accuracy improvement. And so some people will see, 10 or 15% increase in their bill. So on a $50 water bill, you're probably talking $5 to $7 a month, right? Some people won't see any because their meters are accurate because they were newer anyway, right? But everyone will now pay the fair share. To answer yep. And to answer your question directly on the electric, it's 0.5% pickup.
That's the phrase I was looking for, your
Yeah.
fair share, because while what you're saying all makes good sense in this arena,
Right.
and we're talking about 5%, give or take $5. But we're talking about people who live on a fixed income of sometimes way below the poverty line.
Yeah.
And 10% of their utility bill makes a difference between staying warm or buying medication. You see what I'm saying? And a lot of those people are vocal. They call at home in all hours of the day or night to tell me about it. And I just want to be able to have an answer or a responsible response, a logical response to their concerns.
And what you'll never know
It's
is,
only
is
fair.
whether or not their individual meter was accurate or not, right?
Right.
And what we've done is we've tested the rating
Okay.
sample.
And I don't mean to bog down the presentation, so
No,
please proceed, but thank you for your responses.
so, I do want to address some of the things that we would do as part of our scope in terms of those anomalies. So, like a customer of yours that would automatically see a huge spike in their bill, water, gas, or electric, right? Part of our scope when we implement this project is a business review service, so that we can pick out those anomalies if that were the case, right? I mean, that's gonna happen in any project that we're looking at for meter replacement. You know, some people might see a change, right, and they're gonna want to know more information. But we are gonna do our due diligence on our side to make sure that there's no anomalies that are gonna be really in that magnitude. Because sometimes, you know, they've been, and honestly, I mean, sometimes what happens is that they've been under a different rate code all this time, right?
Yeah, don't misunderstand anything that I just said, but I guess it's our job, city's job, to have our customers understand this and become team players in the whole thing. This is something that logically, responsibly needs to be done.
Absolutely.
Okay, and it's just a question of having people accept the expense of doing it. Okay, go ahead.
And Councilman Manny, I mean, we can help with that dialogue and provide you some templates that you see other cities
With
use.
a little bit of publicity and some common sense logic to what we're trying to do, we can have people understand. Thank you.
So 3 components of what we're doing: the comprehensive water, gas, and electric, truing up what's in the field with the database. That's the foundation of what we need to build upon. And then we're going to go out and cross that T in terms of replacing the meters that we believe are to be inaccurate. So everybody pays their fair share of the utilities. And then on top of that, we'll be putting essentially a transceiver to collect that meter data and populate it into a central location that will reside where the city wants it to reside. Typically, it resides in the billing department. So there's some ease in collecting revenue when that happens, not only from a distribution point of view, but from the billing department. When Anna Jones comes in and says, hey, I have this bill that's $200, right? And somebody from the billing department can look through some of their historical records. We've done our due diligence to make sure that, hey, all that information is correct. The city can say with confidence that, this is really interesting. Your neighbor has a pool, right? And you know, his meter hasn't changed, and it's the summer. So, I mean, there's some things that can happen when you have that data readily accessible.
I have another question for you. So you're saying that they're going to be pulling from an internet standpoint, you know, to get the data. Are all the meters going to have a separate power source or a Wi-Fi enabled kind of system, or what if the power goes out and there's a problem? I mean, I'm just thinking about the logistics of the meter itself and how you get registered data from it.
Right. So the water meters have batteries that last a certain expected life. The electric meters are already powered at the source. So the electric meters will have the electric source essentially to power that meter.
Okay, and then the gas?
And the gas have batteries as well.
Okay. So let's say the batteries die. Is that on the city's staff to go and replace these batteries, or how do we get in contact with our consumers to say, hey, you're about due for a new battery, we need to come and replace it? What's a typical protocol that you've done in other communities?
Sure. So our package involves any type of battery replacement over the 20-year cycle. And now battery life is dependent on the environmental conditions. So the warranty for those batteries from the suppliers that we have are essentially a 20-year warranty. There are warranties that are for 10 years, and so we've actually included that cost as part of the cash flow. Now, it doesn't mean that in 20 years those batteries are going to die. Depending on their environmental condition, those batteries can last for as long as, beyond 20 years. There's no...
Are they rechargeable? I'm thinking like if a water flows through it, it's going to turn a propeller.
Yeah, I know.
The battery.
The technology is not quite there yet.
Oh, that's
Sorry.
Right,
you get a rechargeable battery in itself. With the
Yeah.
Think about that, guys.
I'm gonna patent that.
They're not.
I will.
Carlos R. Lopez.
So with that, I'm going to run through some benefits of this project. So what we're looking at is a $6.4 million project. This is going to be a self-funded project based on some of the benefits that we've quantified through doing this revenue reconciliation project. So what we've quantified is roughly $384,000, $191 on an annual basis that's going to be guaranteed. Our cash flow assumes a $0 utility rate increase. So what that means is that we haven't assumed that you're going to raise water, gas, or electric rates through this process. This is based on your current tariff structure for all three of those utilities. The most important part of this is this utility billing data integration. The data that we're going to be collecting is what's going to be used for you to bill appropriate revenue. The enhanced customer service is going to be a component of this advanced metering infrastructure because now that information is readily accessible. We're going to replace that infrastructure that's out there right now, which for all intents and purposes act as cash registers for the city. I put a brief definition for the installation of advanced metering infrastructure. You have the hardware that's in place, which is the meter itself. You have some collection infrastructure out throughout the city, and then we have receivers and software and transmitters that's going to be part of that process, collecting all that information back to a central location. So it's going to serve essentially as a data highway. So,
I have a quick question
Sure.
for you. So for that bill, is there a key benefits?
mhm.
Is there some type of an interest rate on that 6.4 million?
Yes, so it would be finance rate. So part of our process was to look at requests for proposals for lenders. We received 4 responses, and of those 4 responses, we have one very aggressive, responsive lender that we're using the rate for, and it's a 3.88 as the financing rate for 20 years.
So that's $14.48 in interest per year, about $26,666 per year over 20 years, plus another $1,400. That's not bad. That's less than $30,000 a year.
There is the interest rate has been a topic of conversation, so we'll talk about that in a minute. But so first off, JCI is not making money on that. That's obviously that's a third party that will be providing the
financing
lease, the lease purchase. We've got it locked in right now that will get us through the end of the month up into the Federal Reserve meeting at the end of the month.
So that's about $28,000 a year. Not really. So at the end of the 20-year term, I'm guessing that's when our lease, if you will, is due. Does it go month to month? Does it go year to year? I mean, what is the thought for after that 20 years? Because, you know, it's great to see 20 years we're covered, but what about the next 20 years or 40 years? What is the standard for protocol in this regard with other communities that are maybe breaching this term of their lease or have already gone over?
Sure. So what we provide in terms of that cash flow is a cash neutral, paid for, self-funded through benefits to pay back the debt service over a 20-year term, which is within the expected average useful life of the equipment that we're installing. In that, we can also build any other type of financing that would be required to take you beyond that. Right now, that's not included as part of this project because that infrastructure could last longer than 20 years. Okay. And so that is something with the aggressive rate that you have now that could be something that you look at. Now keep in mind, what we're guaranteeing is something that we are confident that we can guarantee. The city might actually manifest and garner more benefit than what we're guaranteeing, which we see frequently. So it's up to you how you want to do those funds. We don't have a share in those funds, but that's the model that we build from.
Hey, bro, real quick. Can I jump in? So, to your question, Councilor Lopez, so after the 20 years, it's a lease purchase, you own it.
Right.
You're done paying, all the meters are yours, there's no note against those through that. At that point, all the benefits are coming to you, the city, and you can do what you will with those.
I guess I'm just kind of thinking of like, say, if I get a contract with a security system, and the cameras are, you know, finite to a certain degree because technology ever changes, and this sounds like a technology upgrade for us as well as a mechanical, you know, portion of our utility reading. So I just want to know, is that something that we may have to replace in 20 years, or like you said just now, it might go a little longer, which would be great because like some of the meters we have now are probably 100 years old in some places, and they're probably not accurate, but they're still working.
Right. And that will be the case as well with your meters that we'll be replacing by. The things that will be finite in terms of the expected life would be the batteries.
Okay.
Yeah, for the water meters. So, in fact, the water meters that we're going to be, that the staff has chosen to be replaced with have no moving parts, so they should even last even longer in that regard.
Okay. Thank you.
I guess I'll just add, you mentioned the expected useful life. That is something, it's a statutory requirement, it's a programmatic requirement for the energy performance contract, and it is just that expected useful life. To your point, a lot of times these meters, the cities have meters in place for 60 years, so it's just something that the program, the ESCO, the energy service companies, you know, across the country, really, they look at that expected useful life to put some boundaries around the term of the project.
Okay. Thank you.
So another thing about TOPS, which is great, they don't violate TABOR. In the Colorado statute, they're subject, lease purchase by definition, are subject to annual appropriations, so they don't violate TABOR in that regard. We understand the city already has experience using tax-exempt lease purchases for some of the departments. I want to talk a little bit about implementation. The process that we are recommending is a turnkey process. So Johnson Controls, acting as your performance contractor, would be responsible for the performance of the implementation of this project. So the backbone of that is essentially the advanced metering system. We anticipate with the natural gas installation a 15-month construction cycle. So during that time period, we will have dedicated staff managing this project with city staff. What that looks like is essentially somebody from Johnson Controls overseeing that execution. So the meter replacements, the data management, the call centers, scripts, handouts for informing your customers, informing the residents, and informing the business owners. We do a lot of QA, QC in the field to ensure that the customer is not bothered. We communicate directly with the city to make sure that the city has all that information as it comes online. We have a portal that we use in order to convey that information readily to the building department to make sure that we don't skip a beat.
I have a question. So when you say it's a 15-month construction project, when the new meters are installed, do they come on board and start reading? And does that system work in conjunction with the old system, and it's a gradual, or is that the way it goes?
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Councilwoman Griego. So it's a phased implementation.
Okay, that's good for city staff for sure.
Oh yeah. We know the city doesn't sleep, and so the one thing is the comprehensive water, gas, and electric audit. That will be the first thing that we do to make sure we understand what's out in the field, so that way we can accurately order the appropriate equipment out there. So the fittings, all of that stuff, in order to configure into that infrastructure. We already have a window of that through the meter testing, where our staff's gone out there with the city staff as well. The city staff knows a lot of the foremans, water, gas, and electric foremans, know the infrastructure really well. So we'll be working hand in hand with them, but not also try to, burden them with this.
Excuse me, it occurs to me that in the city limits we have all three utilities, city gas, electric, and water. But there are many city water users that live in the county. That's included in this project as well?
Yep.
And we may end up using a different type of reading device where we have to use radios to drive out to get to
understand that, I'm thinking of where my parents live.
Yeah, I mean,
County.
you can't extend the internet infrastructure.
No, I got that, I understand it. And then as you were talking earlier, someone was talking about the water, the meters in general, and no moving parts, and the integration in our existing system. Tower, camper proof. We have some creative individuals. We'll put a big magnet on it, I know, just to watch it break, but it's gonna happen, right? Are they secure?
So, yeah,
I
there are
mean,
some
you can know
measures
if
that we
somebody's
do.
been messing with it, right?
Right,
Okay.
right. So your advanced metering infrastructure is actually going to give you more insight into that because
Okay.
you'll know more readily if somebody's been tampering with that. Either through use, historical use, that you'll have a record now.
That and fingerprints.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Yep. You know, we've done projects where there's a greater chance of that, and there are some options that we can consider for tamper-proofness, if that's something that you want to consider. But again, your AMI system is going to be that foundation to give you an idea of which accounts maybe you want to flag for something.
Yeah, it'd be hard for me to think of things that you probably have already considered.
Well, you know, every city's different, so I
Thank you.
appreciate that comment.
How does this technology get back to the billing system as far as the meters? I mean, does it electronically come into the building and say, or wherever it's at to billing? Is that how that works?
Right, yeah, so part of the infrastructure is there's gonna be towers and receivers across the city that's gonna collect that information through radio frequency. And
So-
that frequency is exclusive to these vendors that make this technology.
So right now, with the way we have the Tyler technology, are we set up to receive this information?
Yes.
Because I don't think we are we?
Yes, Tyler.
Yep. So we will
Sure.
work with
Tyler technology is far behind the little human beings, you know. That's all I have to say on that, but that's what I wanted to make sure that we're prepared to take all this information.
We do work with technologies in other cities, so we're not unfamiliar with them. They are capable of receiving the information that we're gonna send them. But part of our project is to make sure that this all goes well. Because like I said, we work
Well,
with
with the
Tyler.
experience that I
Yeah.
had with going through this for about 3.5 years, it was problematic to the city and until our building department threw that company. So I just wanted to make sure that was
Absolutely.
a question.
You're not the only city it's problematic for, and you're not the only one we've helped overcome integration issues with Tyler.
Remember that. Okay.
So this is just a breakout of the benefit streams that we've quantified that will pay back that debt service over time. So a big portion of this benefit stream, the city has already allocated that they recognize needs to be reinvested into that infrastructure. So we would ask the city reallocate those funds for this project, which we would accomplish in that 15 months. The other portion of that project is going to be through the hardware that we're putting in place and that reconciliation of billing error. So part of that is just replacing those meters with accurate meters, having everybody pay the share that they're supposed to pay. And another big component is the billing error, right? Because over time, that billing error magnifies if it's not trued up within the system. So let's talk a little bit about the cash flow. What we're looking at is a $6.4 million project that cash flows positive over 20 years by $100,000. Now that means that in the Colorado statute, we need to show cash flow positive on an annual basis. So this isn't some years that are negative, some years that are positive. This is cash flow positive every year. What this number also includes is a percentage of contingency. So this is owner and contractor shared contingency. So if there's something that occurs out in the field that you want to address, then we could use that amount for that contingency. So that number includes that. That's about 5%-ish, the 200,000. How the cash flow is presented is that it matches the savings every year. what we included in the cash flow was a utility escalation of 0%. This is very conservative for most cities and local government customers that I believe we've looked at in Colorado and elsewhere in the West region. Most of the time, you will see utilities increase in terms of escalation. For the city of Trinidad, understanding that maybe you haven't observed that historically, we've positioned our cash flow very conservatively to assume an escalation of 0%. However, we do have escalation in there for O&M savings, which is 3%. Performance management is how we verify the savings have been met to council and to the city staff. That's required 3 years by the Colorado Energy Office, and what that includes for the first 3 years is business review services. So what that means is it's particularly essential for the first year. So as the system gets phased in, what we will see is the actual billing and meter data come in. Our staff is prepared to look at that on a quarterly basis to make sure no anomalies exist, and if anomalies exist, then we rectify it right then and there. The first year, we don't wait for that full year to come by and go, oh, by the way, we have a shortfall, or if we're positive, we're positive, right? But we should be tracking that as we're bringing on the system. So we'll do that for the first 3 years, according to the Colorado Energy Office statute. Water push-pull in year 3, yes?
Quick question, I'm
Please.
sorry. So after the 3rd year, we would have to pay for those services should we choose to
Correct.
have them? Okay.
Correct. Yep. So one component of that after year 3 is the measurement and verification that the city could opt in to continue for that guarantee. What we've seen historically is that if you don't prove, if we don't prove that we've met that guarantee or exceeded that guarantee after 3 years, then typically the value of that M&V services becomes in question, right? Because we'll typically see the rectification of that revenue within the first 3 years of the contract, in most cases. When we're talking about meter data, it doesn't wait until beyond 3 years to surface, right, if there's some sort of anomaly. And what we've also included as part of the cash flow, and Councilman Lopez, this kind of talks to one of your first questions, is we have annual O&M fees associated with that particular manufacturer that's collecting that data. That is the vendor for that infrastructure included as part of the cash flow. So those annual O&M services are from the manufacturer themselves that they require in order to uphold that system for you. And so that's the superhighway essentially that they'd be hosting.
What's the typical cost on average?
About 20 grand, yeah. The system that the city has selected is the most cost-effective of another supplier. Some suppliers have greater O&M costs associated with their system. The vendor that was selected was very aggressive in their pricing for the city, very interested in doing some work, and with that, what we've seen is that they've had half the cost typically of other AMI manufacturers.
And are you aware of who that company is?
Yes.
Are they fairly reputable, or
Absolutely.
I mean, sometimes you get what you pay for,
Uh-huh.
and I don't want to say like, well, we went with the cheapest thing, and then we get the cheapest thing.
Yeah, right. So solid point. I'm going to show our cards a little bit here, but so Johnson Controls has been doing this for a long time, and we were one of the first performance contractors to put a guarantee behind some of these advanced metering infrastructure networks. I'd like to believe that the city selected us for that intelligence, essentially, and that experience. And so the packages that the city evaluated that we brought was from a short list of manufacturers that we've all worked with. So they're all, the 3 manufacturers that we considered were all very reputable. The one that the city selected, which is the best financial performer for the city, we believe we have a very high confidence level in because we were the first installers to put their system online in the US, period.
Okay, thank you.
So, moving on to what's next. So as I mentioned, we're here today because we believe that the staff has supported the best financial package that we have for you today. It's the best operational performance fit for the city. We're willing to stand behind that in terms of the performance and the guarantee. Right now, we have an opportunity to seize the 3.88% financing rate. The way that the lending goes with performance contract is they can only lock for 30 days. And so they've been very gracious with us in terms of refreshing that rate. Josh mentioned earlier that the feds meet at the end of this month, and so anything beyond that is going to be at the city's risk in terms of that financing rate.
The market's kind of pricing in a quarter-point increase.
Increase?
So, yes.
Okay, so you said not to exceed contract amount of 6.4 million. I saw earlier you had a note that said no change orders.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, if there is an additional fee that's incurred because of some unforeseen situation, that is not going to be added on to our bill.
So, a change in scope would be considered a change order. So everything that we have identified as part of our scope is a firm fixed price.
Okay.
So the city could choose to request additional financing. And let me know, Taylor, if I'm speaking out of turn, but the city could choose to request additional financing for whatever that might be. Right now, what we have priced in that 6.4 million is about 5% contingency. So again, that's an owner and contractor shared contingency. So if
And that was
there's
the 200,000 and the 100,000 you mentioned earlier.
yeah, 200,000. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, then the other 100,000 isn't part of that contingency.
I don't think so. The 100,000.
You had $100,000 listed right above that $200,000.
I think it was $100,000 positive over the term.
Oh, right.
Oh, okay. Then I'm sorry. Then
That's the cash.
So
that's the cash flow. I'm sorry. Then I'm
if we have a scope to replace 10 meters and the city comes back and says, you know what, we would like to replace 2 more over there, then that would be an additional cost to the city. But if the 10 meters, for instance, costs $1 more than what we say it will, that dollar comes out of our hide, not the city's. So if you guys request additional scope, yeah, then it will cost additional dollars. But for the scope that we have identified, if there's any changes or issues with that, that's a JCI problem, not the city of Trinidad's. If that makes sense.
That makes sense. I'm just trying to think, like, say if we have something unforeseen that we need to go and get more financing for. I mean, I would like to stick with that same rate of 3.88% as opposed to dipping into our own coffers.
Correct.
We've tried to cover as much of the contingencies as possible.
Yeah.
In that 6.4 million, we've probably got more gas meters than you're going to end up having to replace, for example. Right. So the idea is to further bring that cost down. It's never to go up, right? So
That's a really good point. The gas meters are probably, right now we have the count at maximum amount. We don't, worst case scenario, you replace all of the gas meters that we have identified. We don't think that's going to be the case, but we can't promise that until we do the detailed analysis that Rowena is talking about as part of the overall deal. So we think that there is contingency built into that as well.
Okay.
So we're looking at, you would be looking at a significant anomaly that would start digging into the city's coffers the way it's priced up right now and the way we've accounted for things.
You also made a comment that we may have more meters than we need to actually implement. With that being said, does that mean that there's a deduction in the cost to us?
That's right. Everything we're talking about right now is we're saying do not exceed roughly 6.4 million. So if those prices come down, I would love to pocket that and JCI takes it. That's not the case. The fact of the matter is the city of Trinidad will get those dollars back for every meter that's not replaced.
Okay.
I have a question. While you were speaking, it came to mind. So are we going to order extra meters for new construction within the city? How is that, how do we handle that? Because there is some new commercial construction, I believe.
we do leave stock of all the different kinds of meters. Yeah. I mean, as you would build out a whole new subdivision, you're not necessarily gonna have the stock for that, but there is a percentage of stock that we leave behind of all the different meter types.
Okay.
And it's normal for us to keep an inventory on hand to handle those kind of things.
All right, thank you.
So last bullet point, if the city and the council are excited about reconciling some of the revenue, what we would suggest is let's try to secure some financing to take advantage of that interest rate. It's right now eminent that the likelihood of those interest rates going up is on the horizon. We do have a very aggressive lender on our hand. Johnson Controls has worked with that lender before on other performance contracts, so they're very comfortable in a tax exempt lease purchase for the city, and are working with Johnson Controls. The not to exceed amount would be essentially the authorization for us to continue with working with your council and your city manager to negotiate the final terms of the performance contract in a not to exceed amount of that amount for financing.
Have we the city kind of seen a meter or what you're talking about, and have we kind of like put one in place to like test drive it, you know, like a new car? I mean, there's a lot of things that, you know, this is what I heard through the grapevine, that we did have a couple of these meters purchased and a couple of them installed, but I didn't know that that was for a fact, Mr. Valentine, or and we took those meters and, like I say, took it for a test drive and see how those meters work. Were there any problems that came up while the meters were in, or wasn't? But that's what I just heard, and that's why I wanted to bring it up to see if that was all possible for the city to know.
So yes, we did, as part of the push-pull that they talked about, the statistical meters, I think we replaced 160, is that right? In residences. So there are those meters out there currently. Just the meter. We don't have the AMI infrastructure actually gathering the data from them. We just put those in. What they're going to do is they took the 160 meters, bench tested them, got the analysis on what we're losing based on the old meters, and now we have new meters, so we were able to compare. So yeah, we have taken it for a test drive on the water meters.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Because like I say, you know,
Yeah, that's a good
see how they actually perform, whatever, you know, it kind of gives Mike there, or see what's going on.
Good to know.
Absolutely, and that was one of the things that we coordinated with the city staff, was to understand which was their preferred meter. And so when we went to go out and test the water meters, we replaced them with their preferred meter.
So far, no problem.
I haven't heard it so far.
So far, Mike, no problem. Okay.
What is going to become of the old meter systems from the waters, where you have like the line that goes out to the house where they can put their reader on that little black button, if you will? That's for water, correct?
Correct. And it basically, we're replacing that little black button where the reader has to physically go out and touch that for a touch read. Now we don't need the meter reader. We're utilizing in other parts of the city to do other work. This system's going to read it, send it into billing. Say you come in and say, I'm moving, can you give me my final bill? What happens now is we send a meter reader out. We don't hold the people there. We say, well, here's your final bill, but there's going to be a final bill when we're. Now we can say, well, hold up a minute, get those reads, charge them that final bill, and we won't lose, because we do lose a lot when people skip. So,
Okay.
so that little black button will be replaced with an actual endpoint that will sense it.
So red button.
Okay. All right.
What you'll see is a box, essentially, that's going to cover that button. And nobody's really gonna interface with that box. Because that box is just gonna transmit a signal.
So did we get where you wanted to be?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know, it depends on what you're gonna say next.
What do you need from us? I guess you don't.
Well, we can't make a decision because this is a work session, correct?
Right,
No,
no,
it's
would you feel okay with putting the next step on the next agenda?
It seems
Definitely.
appropriate.
Yes.
I mean, I'm confident that these folks have done due diligence and
And then
with
the
a
other
straight
thing,
face give us the truth.
and then the other thing too is, if you would have no objections, we can lock in for at least 2 weeks or,
As long as you got the core.
Don't miss any opportunities.
yeah, because otherwise you could.
What is the time frame for that 30-day financing that you mentioned earlier in order to lock that 3.88% in? What's our time frame on that?
It would be 30 days, yeah, to close for financing.
From what date?
From today's.
From today's date? Okay.
I actually don't think it's from today's date.
No, I think it's
It's
the
through
end
the
of
end
the
of the
month.
month.
It's through the end of the month.
It's through the end of the month, not from today's, no.
Oh,
We're
right,
allowed
30
to have
days from
10
today.
days.
We basically, yeah, where we're at is, if you guys are okay, we'd like to get approval at the next meeting, at your September 18th meeting, that would allow city staff to negotiate enter into a contract with us, contractually through the CEO, and that would allow us then to go and sign a contract on the financing piece as well. So we can't have one without the other, so
So you need a resolution from us at our next meeting.
we
Yes.
do.
Well, that would totally be up to the city clerk if that's possible, right, Roger? That's possible to get it on the agenda and stuff.
On the agenda tomorrow.
Okay.
So there'll be 2 resolutions, one for enter into a contract and one to sign a contract for the financing as well, 2 pieces. Next on the 18th.
It could be in one, I think we'll probably do it in one
We'll look
resolution.
at. As long as we can knock both of those out, we'll come back with the resolution to make sure we got everything locked in.
Okay.
Is everybody happy?
Well, if I may ask, one other request, I would love to work with your council to look at the Colorado Energy Office performance contract itself. So this would be a contract that the Colorado Attorney General has looked at for these type of projects. If we could ask of council today to just go and start looking at that contract.
How's your
Yes,
schedule?
Yeah,
Can you start tonight?
The right answer. Yeah, right.
Can you start tonight after this?
Yeah, right now, no football's on.
He's not listening, he's a Raider fan.
Yes, sorry. He'll come to game soon, yeah, but I'll get
I
right
like
on
your
it.
time.
We'll give you the 7 a.m.
I know.
Because of that, I'm not saying it's not
Just
great.
don't ask me any questions.
We're on it, you gotta.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Yeah.
Yes.
All
Sir,
the-
yeah.
That's fine.
So we would ask to that end, that's a good point. So the way the contract comes together is, the contract's really made up of 2 different pieces. You have the investment grade audit that we've done really essentially becomes a large part of the contract. And Taylor hasn't approved all of it, but he's approved a lot of it, and I think we'll have, what's left is some fine details that we'll have hammered out. The other piece of the contract is the terms and conditions, which is a boilerplate template that they have put together and that we've been a part of. So that's really, I mean, we just need to get you, I think, the terms and conditions so you're good with it.
Sounds great.
And Taylor, I mean, you can do whatever you want. There's a large technical document that Taylor has reviewed.
I'll just say I'm waiting on Taylor.
All right, that's right. Yeah, we're gonna blame it all on Taylor. Yeah.
Just kidding, that sounds great. I will do that.
So are you good with the Khalil Mack trade or?
Not at all. No, very.
I was just curious about
Too
that.
soon.
Okay,
Too soon.
okay.
I'm not sending you happy.
It's good to poke the attorney before we review it. Yeah.
That's right.
All right.
So I want to thank all of you that appeared today, because we recognize this was a special session. We think this is, I think, as a Colorado resident, this is a very important project in the city of Trinidad. And I appreciate your forward-thinkingness and reinvesting into your infrastructure.
We thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
You were a special guest.
Yeah.
Thank you. Let you get back to the rest of your evening.
Yeah.
Any other discussion or comments?
No, sir.
Motion to adjourn,
So moved.
second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Over there.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for coming.